Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us nice and early on your Sunday morning. We're gonna give it about 5 minutes to let some additional people join. But in the meantime, we'd like to get to know you all a little bit. So if you could type in the chat box and answer these couple of questions we have on the screen. I see that Tiffany has already done so. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. And we'll get started in a couple minutes. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for taking a couple of minutes to introduce yourself in the chat box. We're going to be doing some more interactive activities together, so you can go ahead and keep the chat box open. So the title of our presentation is Student Advocates for Sexual Health, the Importance of Youth-Led Research in Sexual and Reproductive Health. And as you read from our session description, you're going to be hearing today from SASH, the Student Advocates for Sexual Health, who are a youth-led research team at the Center for Reproductive Health Research in the Southeast at Emory University. And we're hoping to talk to you today about what Youth Participatory Action Research, or YPAR, is, what young people and youth-serving organizations can achieve with YPAR, and you'll hear from our SASH youth members about their research project together, as well as talk about what the importance is and impact of youth-led research in sexual reproductive health, and how you all, as a researcher or someone who works with young people or works at a youth-serving organization, can support young people with doing YPAR. So with that, here's our agenda for our session today. We're going to spend a few minutes introducing ourselves, and then I'll talk for about 10 minutes about what YPAR is and about Emory and Rise's Youth Engagement Initiative, where SASH got started. And then I will turn it over to our amazing SASH team members, who will talk to you about their team and their project, and we'll do a little Q&A session with them before we move into taking your questions and having a little discussion with you about your work and how what we're doing might intersect with your work. So to start introducing ourselves, my name is Victoria Donnelly. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am a public health program associate at Emory's Center for Reproductive Health Research in the Southeast, and I'm the coordinator of the Youth Engagement Initiative.
Good morning, you guys. My name is Leah Lawson. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a public policy student at UVA, and I hope to work in government and advocate for reproductive justice and racial inequality. Or advocate for racial equality.
Hey everyone, my name is Isabella Jackson. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a first-year student at the University of Georgia studying biological science on the pre-med track with a focus on serving underrepresented communities.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Shaylin Lee. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a first-year elementary education major at UGA, and I hope to work towards education equality no matter race or income.
Hi, my name is Jenna Odom. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a senior at Wheeler High School who's interested in public health.
Thanks, guys. So I'm going to get started with just a little bit of background information about what YPAR is. So I'd like to do a little activity first. So if you all could type your answers to this question in the chat box. When you hear the word research, what do you think of? So for example, you could think about, who do you picture doing research? What does a researcher look like? Where do you picture research being done, and what does that look like? I'll give you a couple minutes. And it can just be a few words or phrases. It doesn't have to be anything super lengthy. Okay, so I see we have a few responses. I see we think about youth learning and conducting quantitative and qualitative data with other youth. And we think about data, surveys, community members coming to you or the lab. Doesn't mean that that's a best practice. So these are all great answers. I think that there are some traditional understandings about who does research, what research looks like, who gets access to that information. And YPAR is really a way of reclaiming and reframing who does research, who creates knowledge, and in what way. So YPAR, or Youth-Led Participatory Action Research, is an innovative approach to positive youth and community development based in social justice principles, during which young people receive training to conduct research, to initiate change on issues that affect their lives, their communities, and the institutions that are intended to serve them. So through YPAR, we can redefine who has the expertise to produce knowledge in our world. It's not just adult researchers, but also young people who are researching issues through their lived experiences. We get to practice skills in inquiry, evidence, and presentation that are important to young people's development as students and as agents of positive change in their schools and their communities. We generate findings that provide insights into issues that young people face and that they themselves experience, as well as the resources that matter in helping to solve those issues. And we promote young people's socio-political development and their empowerment so they understand the roots of problems that their communities are facing and have the tools and skills to take action. And finally, we can evaluate programs, policies, and practices that affect young people and that might not always have been developed with the input of young people, unfortunately. So there are several different steps to YPAR. The first step is getting started to understand what YPAR is and what its steps are, to understand the dynamics of youth and adults working together, of sharing power and seeing each other as resources, to come together and form a strong team. And then you'll define your issue, figure out what you want to investigate and how to define that issue through reflecting on your prior experiences and developing critical perspectives on what could be. You figure out what you know already and what you don't know, and use that to identify your research questions. Next, you investigate. So once you know what you want to change, you go out and collect and analyze more information about the issue. You learn about the tools that you can use to investigate your issue and find solutions. And you meet with key players who know a lot about these things and design your research protocols, collect and analyze your data. And once you're equipped with data, you can figure out the best course of action to help solve the problem. So you decide on key findings and implications of your data. You think about, so what do we find? And then you select your action steps, or now what are we going to do about it? And you map who has power in relation to the problem that you want to solve, so you know who you need to be talking to about what you found. You engage in dialogue with those adults about your findings, and at the end, you evaluate whether you achieved the goals you set out at the beginning. So that's an overview of the steps of YPAR and what it's all about. There are also some theoretical models of youth participation that we use in developing how we would want to engage youth in research at RISE. So one of them is youth as objects, recipients, and resources. And you want to go about shifting from viewing young people as objects or recipients of programs to viewing them as resources. So instead of adults feeling like they know what's best for young people and should control the situations in which they allow young people to be involved in designing a program or opportunity. And you also don't want to stick to believing that adults only want to allow youth to participate in a program because of the value of the experience that it brings to young people. Instead, you want to view young people as resources and respect the contribution that they can make to planning, operating, and evaluating programs, and share leadership and decision-making roles between adults and young people. and know that both young people and adults both have strengths to contribute. And then there's also Hart's ladder of participation, which this is a little bit adapted, but there are different rungs to the ladder. So at the very far bottom end is where young people are manipulated or used as decoration or tokenized in programs. Moving towards they might be assigned to different roles in a program, but not really informed about how and why they're being involved. Or young people may be consulted, moving more towards where programs are led and initiated by young people, not just adult initiated and young people get a say, but where young people and adults actually share in the decision making on projects and programs that are initiated by young people, and they are involved in every aspect of the program. So moving on to talking about the Youth Engagement Initiative at RISE. RISE is a research center at Emory University's Rollins School of Public Health, and it is focused on sexual and reproductive health research relevant to the Southeastern United States. So the Youth Engagement Initiative at RISE was created to engage Metro Atlanta youth as research partners at RISE in sexual and reproductive health, to help RISE develop an understanding of teen sexual health needs and to provide youth-centric insight into sexual and reproductive health research in the Southern US. So we also wanted to train young people in public health research skills and build valuable skills in leadership, research, and community engagement, and create networking opportunities between youth and adult leaders who work in fields related to sexual and reproductive health, so that those relationships could be mutually beneficial in learning from each other. So in the spring and summer of 2019, we recruited young people aged 15 to 18 living in and around Atlanta through social media and through networks with our community partners and youth serving organizations. We ended up with 14 youth members who make up SASH, or Student Advocates for Sexual Health, which is the name of their research team. And they're from all around Atlanta. And we also have 12 adult board members who work in various organizations related to sexual and reproductive health, like Planned Parenthood Southeast, Advocates for Youth, CHOA, and some other organizations. And we began weekly meetings in the fall of 2019 at a day and time that were chosen by our youth members to be most convenient for their schedules, which ended up being Sunday evenings. And we have joint board meetings with our adult boards on a monthly by monthly basis. And since then, from those meetings, SASH came about, and we've since moved to online meetings. But I'm going to pass it over now to our youth members to talk about SASH and their projects.
Next, we want to introduce you to our group within RISE and YEE. We are called Student Advocates for Sexual Health, or SASH for short, and our team consists of teens across Metro Atlanta, graduate students at Emory University, and adults who are involved with sexual and reproductive health, whether that be through services, administration, or education. And although we all come from different backgrounds and we all carry different perspectives on the topic, we all share the common goal of being advocates for sexual health, especially for young people. So we have been together for over a year now, and we've accomplished a lot. So now we're going to go do a quick run through of our goals and our different topics we focused on each month. So we began in the fall of 2019, and we all met each other, and we had our kickoff with our youth and adult members. We did an introduction course to sexual and reproductive health topics in the US and in Georgia. We met with Vox ATL for help deciding on our research topics, and we learned about evaluating accurate and reliable sources of sexual and reproductive health information. In the winter of 2019, we had a meeting with Reproductive Justice 101 training with Miss Christian Adam from Sister Song. We had values clarification activity, exploring our values around teen sexual behavior, and we decided on our team name, SASH, and we created our logo. So that following spring, we began training in research methods. Since a lot of us, we had never conducted research before, we developed our research goal and questions. We learned about different methods of data collection and decided on data collection methods for our project, which ended up being a survey. And we learned about community-based participatory research and did a photo voice activity about sexual health in our own communities. And unfortunately, we had to take a brief hiatus due to COVID. So this past summer and this current fall, we had to switch over to Zoom, and all of our meetings have been virtual. So we started gathering existing data through literature reviews, and we developed our survey and data collection plan. We recruited Atlanta teens to take our survey. We gathered and analyzed the data, and now we are currently working on disseminating our findings, creating final recommendations and products, and taking action with teens, youth serving organizations, schools. And all throughout the process, every other month or so, we led joint board meetings with our adult board members so we can get input and feedback on our progress, and they could share any experiences that they had with us. And before these meetings, we plan them at our youth planning meetings. So the greatest accomplishment we had was designing and carrying out our research project. Throughout the year, we researched and identified several sexual health disparities that we noticed within our own communities, and we developed a research question that would address the majority of our interests and what we identified we can make the greatest impact in. So we noticed that given the diversity of sex education curriculums, there may be a critical gap in educating and connecting young people to resources and services in their community. Therefore, our research question sought to understand how we can increase teens' knowledge of what sexual and reproductive health resources, services, and education are available in their community and how to access them. And the way we came to the specific goal was not very easy, since we all saw flaws within laws and policies pertaining to sexual and reproductive health as well. And we also really wanted to improve access to resources and services. So after a lot of discussion and some voting, we concluded that once we improve everyone's knowledge on sexual health, especially with young people, its very effect could then impact how resources are offered and what laws and policies are voted for. So therefore, education is the main focus of our research goal. However, before we could start investigating our research question, we had to understand what was already out there in the state of Georgia in regards to sex ed, laws and policies and services. So we gathered some information about what existed through literature reviews, and we found that in regards to gaps in sex ed curriculums, regardless if the focus was abstinence focused or more comprehensive, there was still a very large gap in informing students about access to resources, what already exists in their community and how to access them. And we concluded that providing direct information about resources needs to be a component of sex ed curriculums. In regards to laws and policies, we were surprised to find that there were no specific laws that prohibit schools from sharing these services to students. So that posed the question as if there were no laws prohibiting them, why weren't they sharing this information? So we found that policies such as parental opt-out decrease access to information in schools. There is already an emphasis on abstinence-focused sex education. So schools feel that if they teach abstinence, there's no need to also teach about the resources because they wouldn't need them. And other factors such as funding, fear of backlash, and teacher training affect what is shared in schools. And in regards to existing services and organizations, sexual and reproductive health services and organizations do exist in Atlanta. However, young people are not necessarily being connected to these resources and to the resources that do exist. Language on these organizations' websites need to be more teen friendly. They need to be more inviting because a lot of teens may be scared or they may not know exactly what they're looking for or how to contact these organizations. So the information about sexual and reproductive health services need to be communicated in a more inviting manner. So what we wanted to find out was, if not from sex ed, how and where are young people getting information about available resources and education from? What additional information about services, resources, and education in their community would teens want/need? And what do teens think is the best way to provide this information? And we asked these questions in a survey that we conducted this past summer and fall. And we surveyed 83 teens ages 14 through 19. And we found that they all lived in Fulton, DeKalb, Cobb, Gwinnett, and Clayton counties.
So here's what we found out from our research. We knew or had a strong idea based off of us going through the Atlanta public and private school system that there was only a small percentage of people who did receive sex ed, but we didn't know that would be by this significant of a number, this 92.3% of teens that didn't receive sex education, which led us to pose the question, if not from schools, what information and where are teens receiving sexual education and community resources? Because the reality is that sex is occurring and it's better to be safe than sorry. And so here's what we found out is that instead of getting their sexual education from schools, most of the time teens are getting them from resources like the internet, social media, and friends. And while this shows that teens want to learn more, it also shows us that we don't know if these resources that they're getting this information from are credible or reliable, which is why and our findings of that most people aren't aware of community sexual health resources. In the next slide. So in the next slide, you can see that although they're getting resources from the internet, they're not receiving and don't know where to go to get these resources in their communities. And so we also additionally found out, we were additionally interested in what teens wanted and needed to learn about, and that they weren't receiving information from school, the internet, social media, and or their friends. The purpose of this helped us to guide on what information we as a research team needed to be providing to better serve the community. This again highlights more topics that people wanted to learn from a community perspective. They are most interested in learning about birth control methods, healthy relationships, and STIs and HIV. Young people in Atlanta would prefer to learn more about available community sexual health resources from their healthcare providers, the internet, and their friends. And this information just shows us where our work will be best received. They also wanted to be presented with information about community resources in the form of short informative videos, paper flyers, handouts, resource lists, and picture infographics. And so this just let us know what we need to produce as a team, and it helped us create an idea for what we wanted to do for our final product. So then we asked the question of, so what? Why is this all important? So there's a clear need to provide young people in Atlanta with additional information about how and where to access community resources for sexual and reproductive health services and education. Schools have the opportunity to supplement sex ed curriculum with information about where teens can access additional information and services in their community. However, they're not doing that right now. And the importance of that is high. It leads to high STD rates, high teen pregnancy rates, all of those things. Organizations that serve youth should consider youth input on what information they want and need and how they want to receive that information when creating and advertising programs and services. Like we said at the beginning of this, youth-led participatory research is really important, and it provides an outlook that you wouldn't receive otherwise. Instead of a top-down effect, there's more of a collaboration. Our data provides information about what teens want and need direct from teens and starts to fill a critical gap in what is often missing when developing programs and services for teens. It gives us the youth voice. Again, this is really important because sometimes in current curriculums, there is a lot of, well, we think that you should do this. We think we're telling teens to do this, but that's maybe not what they need and what they are looking for. And so now we are currently working on creating infographics, fact sheets, social media posts, and presentations about our findings in order to have conversations with schools, community members, and youth serving organizations about how they can be more responsive to youth's wants and needs related to providing information about available sexual health resources. We are also creating social media posts, short informative videos, and resource sheets to directly provide information to young people in Atlanta about how and where they can access community resources. This will also be shared with schools and youth serving organizations to give to young people. We will continue talking about our group and research in order to inform other young people about what they can do to make change in their communities and inspire other research and youth serving organizations to consider conducting their own form of youth-led research.
All right, so thank you all for sharing about your research. We're going to move into a little Q&A session with our SASH team members to sort of bring it all together about their projects, the experience, and the importance of youth-led research. So we're going to ask a few questions, and then we will give you all from the audience an opportunity to ask questions as well. So our first question is, why did you join SASH?
I joined SASH originally because I was one of the kids that went through the Atlanta public school system, and I found I was a junior in high school and I knew little to nothing about sexual education. And so despite doing my own research, I again wanted it to be credible information and reliable information. And then I also wanted to be able to provide that information that I received to other people so the cycle doesn't continue.
Similar to Leah, I also remember being very uneducated on the topic of sexual and reproductive health. And I knew I wanted to change that, not only for myself, but I also have younger siblings that are also going to go through the same schooling system as I. And I wanted to change that for them and for anyone else that isn't receiving the education that they need. And I found that research and advocacy is the best way to have my voice heard and the way to make changes.
Just like them, I went to public school in Georgia, and before joining SASH, I think I understood the importance of sexual education and why it's a necessary topic. And I think I was so interested in these topics because, like we talked about earlier, Georgia schools' curriculums actually emphasize abstinence-only education. And I also don't talk about these with my parents, so it's always been pretty taboo. And so this opportunity was really interesting to me because I wanted to learn about sexual and reproductive health and also educate other teenagers who are in the same position as me.
Similar to my other group members, I also went through the Georgia public education school system. I only got sex ed in 5th grade, and then I never got it again. So I was really interested in learning more about sex ed for myself and for those around me, and maybe sharing information to other teens who might be in the same situation as I was.
Thank you. Our next question is, why is this project and reproductive health, rights, and justice important to you?
This topic is especially important to me because I feel like reproductive health, rights, and justice is severely overlooked and underrepresented, and the consequences of this can be really severe. It's our right to be educated on how to keep ourselves healthy, and I feel like young people aren't able to exercise this right because the sex ed system is failing them. And being uneducated on these topics can have really negative effects. And these effects are in the policies that we see, and they affect members of our community. It can affect your friends, family, and it can affect everyone around you. So I feel like that's why I'm really passionate about this project.
Yeah, similar to Bella, I think that sexual health resources really like have a widespread impact on your life and the quality of your life. So that's part of the reason it's important to me. And I also just want other teens to know about themselves and know about how they can move like sexually.
All right. Why do you think youth-led research is so important in sexual and reproductive health?
So like we talked about in the beginning, a lot of research that is conducted is adults telling youth what to do and telling youth what they need to care about. But in reality, it's clearly not working. And so youth can provide an outlook and a change in perspective that adults don't have. And that collaboration between youth and adults really creates a strong effects for research, because it allows us to tell adults what we need and what other teens need from our own perspective, seeing it very firsthand. And then it allows adults to understand that and respect that decision, and also help us carry out our plans for things that we can't do because of age.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think that youth-led research in sexual health is so important, because as much as adults don't want to talk about it or think about it, how sexual and reproductive health affects us young people, it really does. I think that our parents' didn't want to talk about it, so our parents don't want to talk about it. So eventually the responsibility to learn about ourselves rely on us as young people, and I really don't think it should be that way. I can look around my school, especially as a college freshman, and see how this lack of sexual education is affecting all of us. And I think as young people, we know it firsthand and we see it firsthand. So it's really important for us to be included in researching topics that directly affect us.
All right. What change do you want to make, and what do you hope to do with your results?
With our results, I hope to be able to change the goals and perspectives of sexual education within students, schools, parents, and just how we view the topic in our society. I want to see a bridge built between sex ed curriculum in schools and the community sexual health resources, so that young people have the option to protect themselves and can finally take control of their own sexual and reproductive health.
I agree with Bella. I want teenagers to have access to the resources that they need, and I want them to be able to know where they need to go. I also want them to have autonomy, know that they have autonomy over their own bodies and their own choices.
All right. And last question before we move on to some questions from the audience. What is your advice, or what would you want to tell other young people who are looking to make change?
Get involved in any way that you can, and figure out how to stick up for yourself and stand up for yourself, because I can thoroughly say that it feels really lonely and small when it's just you and you feel like you have to take on this big issue all by yourself. But if you can create some type of sense of community with your friends, if they have similar passions as you, or with other people outside of your school and in your community, it really helps to feel like you can actually do something and actually push forward, because in reality we are the future, but also we can make change right this second. And so as youth, you just need to continue pushing, and there will be obstacles, and there'll always be obstacles. But if you just keep pushing forward and you have a good support team to rely on, you can honestly really make great change.
Yes, I would say there's always a way to do it. You can always find a way to do it, especially now. Use your knowledge of social media and Instagram and use your peers and facilitate whatever change that you want to see in your community. And I know it's really difficult and we do seem really small, especially being young in such a really big world. But society really relies on young people, because when we grow up, the issues that are affecting us now are only going to affect us as adults too. And I don't think it's ever too early to start your activism.
Agreed. Thank you all for sharing. This has been super informative.
Okay, so now we would love to take questions from you all. I'll give you like 1 or 2 minutes to type your questions in the chat box or the Q&A question section, and we would love to hear from you. Okay, while everyone's typing their questions, I do have questions for us. So I want to ask, what is it like to lead a research project as a young person?
Got me really thinking on that one, Shaylin. I think as a young person, this project in itself was something that was really unique and different, because it was, how many of there are? There's like a lot of us teens and like one area, and we're all like working towards the same goal. So it all feels like we're all on the same page, and there's no like looking down on one another. But so I really loved this research environment, but I know in other aspects it could be challenging because of, I don't know, like hierarchy and like age gaps and things like that. And so when you're faced with trying to show that you do understand what you're talking about, and people just look at you as a young person instead of actually knowing what you're talking about, it is discouraging. But in this actual process that we went through together, I think it was something that was a little different and very unique, and that's not something that happens all the time.
I just wanted to add onto what Leah said. I also think it's super validating that like whenever we would meet with our adult board members, and especially once we to a point where we had data to share, our adult board members were constantly like, this is amazing, like we need this information as people who work in the field and who work in youth serving organizations, they're constantly saying like this information is super helpful for us to know what youth want directly from the voice of young people. So I think it's extremely validating to know that there is a huge need for youth research, not just that it's going to be met like with closed ears by adults, thinking like young people don't know what they're talking about. That adults really do feel like, for the most part, that this is something that's really necessary to continue to improve programs and to make change on curriculums, etc.
Yes. And Tiffany asked if we can talk about ways to interact with youth while minimizing interacting with parents. Okay, this is definitely like a big one. I think, at least for me, like from the perspective of a young person, when my teachers or just people who are in charge of me, I would like to keep some things confidential. So when my teachers are interacting with my parents, say during like a conference, I would like for my teachers not to tell my parents about like my opinions or the things I write about. I think that's really important because at least, especially for this project, talking about sexual health, I feel like some parents may not want to know all of our opinions because they may not agree with them. And with that being said, it is important to have some parent interaction because my parents want to know like where I'm going on Sunday evenings to go do my research. So those things are important to talk about. But as for opinions and that kind of confidential stuff, should be kept between the adult and the young person.
I also think the age range in which we surveyed is a really interesting, it's a really interesting group because it's at this point that that the youth are starting to feel independence and gain a sense of independence. And so that level of interacting with parents is less so, especially if you're talking about in schools or things like that. I know like for my high school, like parents coming in to talk to the teachers about like my child didn't do this, blah blah, was very looked down upon. And so it was on the job of us to advocate for ourselves. And that meant that we had to be independent. And that meant also that our parents were not really involved in what we did at school, except for what we brought home and what we talked about at home. So I don't know if I have specific ways in which you can interact with youth without interacting with parents, but I think it's a lot easier in the age range, the 14 to 19 age range that we conversed about.
I just wanted to add a little bit. That's a awesome question. So we actually got all the way we're almost at the end of our time together as a team, and we're going to be planning for like a final celebration where we share about all of our results and everything that we've accomplished together with our adult board members. And then we also realized that our youth research team members might want to share about their project with their friends and family. So we went ahead and asked if people would feel comfortable with inviting our team members, friends, and family to join our Zoom session where we talk about our final results, because up to this point, we really haven't had any involvement of, we have had involvement of friends in the sense that I think a lot of our youth members recruited their friends to take our survey. But we got all the way to the end and realized we've been together for over a year and a half now, and our youth members, family members might have no idea what they've been working on this whole time unless they've taken it upon themselves to share about it. So any family or parent involvement in our program is really on the basis of whether or not our youth team members decide as a group that that's something they're interested in doing. And then also on the point of parental involvement, just something from our research findings, but we asked a lot about like if we share with teens about available resources in their community where they can get STI testing or have like community sex ed if they didn't get sex ed in school, what would they want to know about those resources? And one of the main things that teens said they wanted to know about is whether or not that service or that resource would provide confidential services, and whether they'd be able to consent to their own care without their parents being present. So we already know like those are things that are really important to youth. So in making resources available to youth that are related to sexual and reproductive health, and in creating programs or research opportunities where youth get involved in making change, it's really important to consider the ability to minimize parental involvement in the process in order to make it a safe space that youth want to participate in. Yeah.
This is a really cool question. How did you feel when you first realized you held power and it's impactful?
I can answer. I think I honestly, this may seem like a weird response, but I think I honestly felt relieved. Like because I wanted and I still want to evoke so much change in this world, and there's so many small issues and big issues that need to be addressed that aren't currently being addressed. And I think the moment when I first realized that I can make change and that it does mean something, I felt relieved that I could continue on in what I'm doing now throughout the rest of my life and still have a positive impact on this world. And I think I was just relieved that I was able to be someone to do it, and like I didn't have to rely on somebody else to do it. And so I could advocate for myself, for my peers, for people in my community, and I didn't need anybody else to validate for me. And so I thought that that was really cool.
For sure. It's definitely an empowering feeling, especially being like a teenager. And you're kind of, at least for me, through high school, I kind of realized like, wow, there's some really messed up things going on in this world. And knowing that like I can do something, even if it is small, to help it just a little bit, it feels really good and empowering. How did you navigate confidentiality between family and youth, given the survey was digital?
That's a good question. I think well, I think we had another question about what our recruitment methods were, so I'll let the SASH members talk about that in a second. But I think just given the way that we recruited, it was only really young people who were accessing the survey via their phones. But we were also upfront in all of our recruitment materials, like Instagram posts that we made or flyers or the emails that we sent out. And then also on the first page of the survey about what the survey was about, so that people knew that it might be about potentially sensitive topics if they don't want to take it in front of somebody else. And then about how we would maintain their confidentiality, as far as we never really asked for identifying information. And so those were some ways that we tried to keep the survey itself confidential.
And recruitment for our surveys, we also just like used kind of our existing platforms as group members. So our own social medias and just kind of like bumping that so that other people and then get our friends to repost to their friends to kind of create a wider range of recruitment. And it was a lot more difficult in a pandemic setting, because obviously we couldn't like talk to people and like get their opinions and like open up the floor to just a bunch of random people. But I think we did get a good range of information. And so I would consider our data very credible.
And yeah, if you asked me to go on there and try to identify my friends, I probably wouldn't be able to. We didn't ask for names or anything like that. And we didn't share the results either, like individual results with anybody. So I think that really helps maintain the confidentiality. And as for recruiting, definitely for us, it was a lot of social media because we weren't in school anymore. So we couldn't like go ask our friends in school, can you take this survey really fast? So a lot of social media, sending it to friends directly. Even some of my friends reposted it on their Instagram, so that was really helpful too. But pandemic really changed it all for us. But I think it worked out well because we got a lot of responses and they're pretty credible.
One last way that we recruited also, just to add on, was many of our adult board members work for organizations where they have some level of youth involvement. They have like a youth advisory board, or they just have a newsletter that goes out to a listserv of lots of young people, teenagers. So we also wrote an email to provide to them to send out as a little blurb in their newsletter, and have them like repost on their social media pages, their organizational social media pages as well. So that was also super helpful.
I think that is it for questions from our audience. Thank you for asking our questions. And now we're going to move on to our next section.
Okay, so we just have some closing questions for the audience. If you were to conduct a research to better understand and act on an issue in your community, what would you choose to focus on? And you can type your answers in the chat box or raise your hand and be unmuted. Okay, I see one answer from Katira, sorry if I mispronounced your name. Youth homelessness, that's a really good one. Is there anything specific about youth homelessness that you would want to focus on? Access to sexual reproductive health services. So that's a little bit of overlap with ours, except ours is like teens and yours is more focused on teens who are experiencing homelessness. That's really cool. So I'm going to move on to the next question. So as a young person, a researcher, someone who works with young people or an organization that serves young people, how could you apply what you've learned in this session?
While we're waiting for other folks to answer, I think something that I'm thinking about after having a chance to hear from our audience members and our presentation is that there's a lot of intersection between different issues that young people might be passionate about. And so it's really important for us to continue, like as young people, to continue to connect with and share with and learn from other young people about things that they're passionate about and goals that they're working towards to find synergy between different youth advocacy projects.
Ms. Brown put in the chat, I love the laws and policy parts. Definitely look more into the in near me. That's what I think it says. And then okay, Nebraska. She said that they'll definitely look into that part more in the lit reviews, etc. I think that's really cool.
That was actually one of my most interesting things. One of the things that I was most passionate about were the laws and policies, because they're so different, varying from state to state, and like everyone has a different opinion and every outlook, but it's still like that taboo-ness of like sexual health and reproductive health. Education is still like universal across all of the states. So like, why is this happening and why is this continuing to happen was really interesting to me as well.
I also think something we learned when we were looking into this laws and policies part for Georgia and Atlanta specifically on how it like affects the type of sex ed and who teaches sex ed, etc. We learned that it is so, like Leah said, like so different from place to place, and it doesn't even have to be from state to state. Sometimes it's from county to county, school district to school district. Because in the state of Georgia, it's very much left up to the school districts to decide what curriculum they're going to teach, who they require to teach it, like what that person's qualifications have to be, etc. And a lot of times we found that there isn't a specific law or policy that says, for example, you can't tell young people about where they can access sexual and reproductive health resources in the community, but school districts are deciding not to do it. So I think that that's something, one part of that laws and policies section that was really interesting, and that like points towards action as far as like how we can sort of more standardized, because someone who's in one part of Atlanta versus another part might have had a totally different experience in their schools.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see how much change in such a small area you can have on the policies that people put in place. And so I'm going to move on to the next question. Did anything about our presentation change your thinking about these topics?
While we're waiting for answers, I can't say really anything about the presentation, but just the experience as a whole. I'm interested in education, so this project has really made me think about education policy and the laws that affect our public education, especially since it's something that I want to go into. So just seeing how policy is affecting our sexual education, which is affecting our futures as adults, is really interesting to me. And it really has me thinking more about it and the wider implications of our laws and the things our politicians do.
Tiffany put into the chat, don't be put off by the perceived efforts of including parents and other adults. That's really cool.
I love that. Sorry, Jenna, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just want to say I love that. I think that we found, I already kind of said this, but I think that we found on the whole that adults are way more supportive than we might anticipate them to be. And like we even found in our research that like, while it seems like we hear constantly like in the news or online that like adults are really like not interested in young people learning about sex or whatever in schools because they prefer that to be something that's personal between parents and their children. Like national surveys have been done that actually show that parents really are supportive of sex ed, more supportive of sex ed than like the news or politicians would lead us to believe. Not everyone agrees on what things should be taught, but I think that there are a lot of like common ground that can be found when we've been doing research and involving adults in the process, and then doing advocacy where we actually have to like talk to adults and try to show them like this is what young people want, this is what we should be doing. I think we've actually been met with a lot more support than resistance. So it's definitely not something that you should let stop you from trying to make change. All right, I think if we don't have any other questions or responses, we'll go ahead and close. I just want to thank our attendees for coming and for being a great engaging audience. It was really great to hear from you, and we'd like to continue to hear from you. So our contact information is on this slide. If you'd like to contact us, our email address is on here. You can also follow us on Instagram at Emory_SASH. We post about our students and our research, and we'll be posting some of the resource guides and other things that we're creating that have come out of our survey results. And our website link is also on here as well if you'd like to read more about our project. And then I put a couple of youth research related resources on here in case you're interested in learning more or using any of these with your groups and in your work. So there's a YPAR hub that has been really helpful for us as we've been developing our sessions and working on our project. Also, Advocates for Youth has a bunch of amazing resources. But this one in particular is a youth activist toolkit that we've used in doing some power mapping and understanding who we should be talking to about these issues. And then the community toolbox, which has community research related tools and helping people understand the different tools to conducting research is linked here as well. So thank you all for joining us again today. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing about their experience. And if you all have any questions, we'll hang around for a couple more minutes and you can type into the chat box. Thanks so much for joining. I think that's everyone. I think we're good to hop off.
Take a picture really fast.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna take a picture. Okay, I'll send that to you guys.
Oh,
Bye, guys.
thank you so much to our Zoom host and our safety and security person. We appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thank y'all. Have a good rest of the day.